Hey everybody, today I'm going to be talking about some horror movies because we are in the month of October, and of course horror movies are some of my favorite movies. But I've already talked about my favorite horror movies of all time, so I thought what I'd do here is talk about some that I consider to be maybe some hidden gems, some horror movies that I think are a little bit underrated, maybe a little bit older, that I think are worth your time. Before we get into all that, I will plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist and I do commissions and I sell prints of my work. If that's something you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a print or a commission, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below. First, I'm going to start with Vampire. And this film came out, I think, in 1932. And it is directed by Carl Dreyer, who is one of my favorite directors visually, especially of the period. This is an extremely haunting movie. It is very much about mood. It's very effective because Carl Dreyer really focused a lot on the starkness of an image. He has very, very, very haunting images. He captured faces in a way that is just incredible. Very few have been able to do it. And so he relies a lot on the imagery to kind of carry a lot of that terror. It's called Vampire, so you think vampires and you barely see any of it. It's all mood. And it was an early movie in once talking pictures became a thing. And, rather than using the gimmick of look, they talk and having a ton of dialogue, Carl Dreyer was one of the people who was like, no, I'm going to keep it minimal. He loved silence. He was better, I think, with silent films. He understood film as more of a language, a visual medium. The film has a very unique editing style. It does feel very dreamlike. It almost feels like a maze when you're experiencing it. Things don't quite add up in the way they're supposed to. It's meant to subvert your expectations a little bit and kind of throw you off mentally, and all that really works. But yeah, there are moments, I won't talk about them because I kind of think they're best to experience, but there are moments in the film that just really, really affected me the first time that I saw them, like most Carl Dreyer films. And it's a really short movie. I think I've talked about it before at some point, but it's a really short movie, totally worth your time. It's a Criterion Collection. Next on my list, and I think I reviewed this not long ago, maybe I'm wrong, I really don't know. It's all a blur at this point, but the next movie that I'm going to go with is 1989's Tetsuo the Iron Man. It was directed by Shinya Tsukamoto. What do I say about this film? It is batshit insane in the best possible ways. It's very cheap, and yet it has so much power as a body horror experience. Body horror, for some reason, is something that I really attach myself to. I'm very interested in humans and ligaments and flesh and the body and how it works. And I think body horror, when done well, can be some of the most effective horror because the things that are so rooted in the flesh can be so interesting to explore. And this film does it so brilliantly. If you've seen Akira and that just kind of visceral feeling of man merging with machine, and it has such a primal feeling to it. And like I said, it's very rooted in the flesh. This has a very similar quality to it. Clearly, Tsukamoto is very inspired by David Cronenberg, and thematically, yes, it's very much like Videodrome. Just covering a lot of the same things, and yet it's handled in a completely different way. Whereas that one is more kind of an examination, it's more cerebral. This one is just more like all done by the emotion. It's like your brain is just going to fly in a million directions. It is lethargic, it is erotic, it is primal, it is also a very short movie. One of those movies where you want to watch it some late night and just go crazy with it. Really just see where your mind can go with it. I just think in terms of effect, it's the perfect one. Next, I'm going to go with a little film called House. This film came out in 1977 and it is directed by Nobuhiko Obayashi. This one I know I reviewed. I reviewed it last year for Halloween, I think. And yeah, I wanted to talk about it more just because I know it is amongst cinephiles. It gets passed around a lot. It gets passed around maybe in like Criterion circles, but outside of that, I don't hear many people talking about it. And I do think, like Tetsuo, it's very extreme. It's very lethargic. It is balls to the wall, batshit insane, but in a very different way. This one is, I don't know, it's more of a horror-y. It's a strange sort of screwball, very Japanese style comedy, but also very much a twisted sort of psychedelic horror film. It's a haunted house story, ultimately. But I love it when you combine humor and terror. I think those two types of emotions are very, very similar, and there's often a very small line dividing them, especially when things get a little bit crazy. And in this film, things get really, really crazy, but it is the strangeness of that. It's the strange subversion between like this cutesy humor and then this just craziness that's happening that is very, very exciting. It has the sort of wild abandonment of a child's imagination. It almost reminds me of like Spirited Away. It feels like a storybook. The special effects are purposely meant to not be very realistic. Everything just has a very specific quality to it. It is a childlike sort of nightmare, but it's also gorgeous to look at in a lot of ways. It really reminds me, if anyone's heard of the band Juju, their music to me reminds me of this film. Like listening to an album like Girl with a Basket of Fruit or like Red Classroom, Angel Guts. Those sorts of albums just take me to this sort of place, and I think about this film a lot of the time. It's just kaleidoscopic, the color, the experience of it, and I really do think it's one of those experiences that everybody who really is interested in film should experience or is interested in art, because rarely does creativity, imagination like this really get to exist and flourish in a way where it's not repressed by, you know, like a big studio or something like that. Next, I'm going to go with Raw, which came out in 2017, I want to say, and that is directed by Julia Ducournau. I remember seeing the Red Band trailer. Watch the Red Band trailer. It's fantastic. I remember seeing that trailer and thinking, I have to see this movie. And the film lived up to every expectation that I could possibly have. It is another body horror film, but I love this one because I think it's so... What you don't expect from it is that it is so comedic. There's a lot of humor in it, but I love that this is a story. It is a body horror story, but it's really just a metaphor for women or young girls becoming women. Young girls starting to find that like libido, that sexual freedom that they have as they go away to college and they're becoming women, and all this feeling that just wants to explode out of you. Being able to explore that through this primal idea of bodies, I think is a fantastic concept. You feel everything in this movie. It is ballsy. And I love the director here because she is not afraid to go there. But I also love that she tells these stories about women. They're compelling women. They are, you know, they're not cute. They're not princesses. You know, they're not afraid to be really intense. They're violent, they're angry, they're stupid, they're sexual, they're everything that real girls feel, real women feel. And it was just, I don't know, for me, it's very refreshing seeing a story like this, but also able to really see the humor in it is the real key there. So that is a movie that I highly, highly recommend as well. Next, I'm going to talk about It Follows. This film came out in 2014 and it was directed by David Robert Mitchell. And I know this film isn't technically like a hidden gem or anything like that, and I don't even know if it's really that underrated, but I will say this about it. You know, art house horror films have made a big splash, you know, in the last 10 years, we'll say, and there are some that really, like The Witch as an example, or Midsummer, those really touched a nerve, and I just don't hear It Follows talked about like that. I think I did at the time of its release, but I don't hear that much about it anymore. And I think that it is absolutely brilliant. I think it's visually a very unique, very John Carpenter in style. It is another example of like a coming of age story, like Raw in a completely different way. And it's something universal that a lot of people can relate to. But it attaches a lot of the horror to the things that scared us the most as children. I, as a kid, always thought if I was going to make a movie, I would want to do something where you have like a wide shot and there's no like build up where you see like feet and like fingers and all of that. You just see a person coming closer and closer and closer in, you know, from the background. That used to be a terrifying idea to me. I thought it was so cool, and it was great to see how they finally used that here, and I'm surprised it's not used more often as a device. Frantically searching the edges of the frame constantly, that paranoia is absolutely wonderful, and again, just something that a lot of people can really relate to. Paranoia of being followed. It has a lot of that 80s sort of nostalgia and maybe late 70s as well, which all, really captures a sense of like budding or like adolescence, youth, budding into this womanhood, manhood, all of that. And really, I just see the film as a big metaphor. I should say the terror in the film being this metaphor for growing up, for becoming sexually active. Just this feeling, this burden of suddenly becoming a sexually active person, and knowing that you carry a sort of responsibility and passing it from one person to the other. To me, it's really just recognizing your mortality, realizing that you aren't a kid anymore, that it is your turn to produce, in a sense, or your generation will be producing children for the next generation. And there is something about how that's captured, especially in the final shot, that I think is one of the best final scenes, final shots of a horror movie I've seen in a long time. So yes, those are a few horror movies that I consider to be underrated, or movies that I think if you haven't checked them out, you should check them out. And there's a million other ones. Those are just some ones that I wanted to cover for this particular video. But that is the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons as always. Thank you guys so much for everything that you do. And if you are interested in becoming a patron, the link to support that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.